Ladies and gentlemen, arm and prepare yourselves. The Outlaw Crypto Podcast is back with a vengeance for Season 2, and our first episode is a doozy. We're diving into the depths of digital freedom and taking on the sinister forces of the global communist cabal with none other than Reuben Yap from Firo. That's right, the revolutionary mind behind the privacy coin that's got the powers that be trembling in their boots. Why is privacy so critical, you ask? Because the global puppet masters, the shadowy cabals, and the nefarious tech overlords want nothing more than to turn you into a mindless drone, shackled by their Orwellian surveillance apparatus. But Firo, my friends, is the digital sword that will slice through their chains and set you free. Firo isn't just another cryptocurrency. It's a beacon of hope in the dark dystopian future the elites have planned for us. With its bleeding-edge Lelantis and Lelantis Spark technologies, Firo ensures your transactions are as invisible as the hidden hand controlling the masses. High anonymity sets, trustless setups, network layer privacy, Firo's got it all. It's like a cloak of invisibility for your finances. Imagine a world where your every move is monitored, every purchase scrutinized, every dollar you spend tracked by the eye of Sauron. That's the nightmare they want for us. But with Firo's hybrid POW and LLMQ chain lock system, you can laugh in the face of their 51% attacks and transactional tyranny. 21.4 million Firo total supply, Firo's proof of work, and over 5,000 master nodes standing as sentinels against the forces of financial oppression. Firo's Elysium tokenization layer. Oh, it's not just a feature, it's a revolution. Private stablecoins, voting tokens, and privacy for bridged assets from other chains. This isn't just a coin, it's a fortress for your financial freedom, a bulwark against the globalist agenda. We'll delve into the cryptographic genius of Firo, exploring how it stands as a solitary titan against the collectivist wave. From Sigma to Lelantis, Lelantis Spark, and MTP, Firo's advancements have set the standard, forcing even the most sinister entities to take note. Reuben Yap will take us through the labyrinthine corridors of financial privacy, showing us how to wield Firo like a digital Excalibur against the encroaching darkness. We'll uncover how the Lelantis Spark technology obliterates transactional visibility, making your financial footprint vanish like a specter in the night. Spark addresses that hide all transaction amounts, zero knowledge proofs that shield your identity. The tools of the resistance are in your hands. So tune in, arm yourselves with knowledge, and join us as we expose the machinations of the global elites and stand tall with Firo, the privacy coin that's more than just currency. It's the key to our liberation. The Outlaw Crypto Podcast Season 2 is here.
Okay, we're back with another episode of the Outlaw Crypto Podcast. I'm your host, Paranoia Machinery, and this is a Podcasting 2.0 podcast, which means that you can boost sats, you can stream sats on the Fountain app and other Podcasting 2.0 platforms. And since we're a privacy-first podcast, you can support the podcast by donating Monero or a variety of other privacy coins, including Wownero. My guest today is Reuben Yap from the Firo project, and I'm super excited to have him on because Firo is a privacy coin that I'm super interested in, and I really don't know a whole lot about. So I was happy to be able to connect with Reuben and invite him on the show, and hopefully he'll be able to tell us all about Firo. Reuben, how are you today? Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, sure. I mean, sorry for the slight delay. I mean, I got off a flight and then I'm glad that you reached out and that I could make it. Yeah.
Where were you traveling from?
Oh, just getting back from the capital city because my wife is actually like living in a different city for her like specialist doctor training. So yeah, I just go there like once a month to visit her. But I don't know. Even the short flight kind of sets me right now.
I know what you mean. Man, that's got to be hard having your wife in another city like that.
Yeah, I mean, like COVID was worse because, like, yeah, we because she's a frontline doctor, like an anesthetist. So, during COVID it was really rough because
Oh, I
like
bet.
we didn't have the vaccine, so we didn't really know what it was. So we had to like stay separately for a couple of months, which was yeah pretty rough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like it, man. So, Ruben, you are the project steward for Firo, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So, I guess like what can you tell us about Firo? I know it's a privacy coin. I know it uses Lelantus Spark encryption, which was originally proposed for Monero, if I'm not mistaken, but made its way into Firo, and I think was also the basis for like the proposed Seraphis upgrade that Monero was going to implement. Am I
Hmm.
am I mistaken in
Uh,
this or?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think Spark is totally our own work. Seraphis, at least the earlier versions of it, was based very heavily off our work. I can
Okay.
go into that later, but just like kind of brief overview. We actually started in 2016 as Zcoin under a different name, still the same chain,
Okay.
and we were the first coin to use something called Zero Coin, and it's not the same as Zero Cash that is used in Zcash. It's actually an earlier protocol called Zero Coin, which had some really cool properties. But yeah, obviously, the limitations to Zero Coin. Zero Coin was actually originally meant to have been a proposal for Bitcoin, but when it was clear that Bitcoin wasn't going to implement any of this. We kind of implemented it, so that's how we started. The other guy that kind of like started this whole project is Poromin, and he was a student under Matthew Green at Johns Hopkins University. And Matthew Green, he's one of the founding scientists of Zcash, and also
Yeah.
the Zero Cash paper, and also the Zero Coin paper. So that's how he came across the Zero Coin paper. He thought it was really really cool, and you had to remember that back then in like 2014, when this paper was published, altcoins were basically, oh, we have a faster block time, oh, we use a different mining algorithm, and that was it. Like, that was all you needed to be an altcoin. But Parmin really wanted to try something different, and he took on the task of implementing Zero Coin, and 2 years later managed to launch mainnet in September 2016. So yeah, that's kind of how it started. But always, even since when we began Zero Coin, we like Zero Cash. We also have a trusted setup. That's kind of like, oh, you have to generate certain initial parameters and then destroy them to make sure that there's no backdoor in the system. We did it through a very cool way, which I guess I probably wouldn't go too much into details. But after that, we were like, look, even though we did the whole trusted setup in a really cool way, but it is not great to have a trusted setup. So we actually moved into a trusted setup like several years later into something called Sigma, which was basically Zero Coin without the trusted setup. And then after that, from Sigma, we went to Lelantus, which allowed you to burn coins of any like arbitrary amount and redeem any arbitrary amount. And then we finally transitioned to Lelantus Spark earlier this year in January. So yeah, it's been a very long ride. We have been, I guess, kind of at the forefront of like privacy protocol development. And Surface obviously is based very, very heavily off our work in Spark. And we actually kind of like open a whole new family of privacy protocols, because back then everyone was like, it's either you go through ring signatures, you go Mimble Wimble, or you go to use something like a Zcash circuit. I guess we opened a different pathway for that. So pretty happy about that, and I think it's a big contribution to the space. Yeah.
Now, how would you say that Firo's privacy compares to Zcash's privacy or Monero's privacy? You mentioned that Lelantis has some things in common with Zcash's cryptography based on Matthew Green's work. Does Firo employ ring signatures like Monero does, or are you using zero knowledge proofs? Like, how does the privacy compare?
Right. So first of all, Lelantis has no relation towards the Zcash protocol. The
Okay.
zero coin paper, the zero coin protocol which we started with had common authors, but it was also a different protocol. So
Okay, thanks
let me
for
talk
clearing that
about
up.
Lelantus Spark today, which is what we're using today. I think that's the most relevant. Which first of all, we don't use ring signatures and we don't use Zcash style circuits. We don't use Halo 2. We use actually, I would say specific, very specific ZKPs. And one of the key things is what we call a membership proof called Groth Booter or one out of many proofs. It's a specialized like ZKP proof that proves membership. That's it. It's not like a circuit thing that can prove like any sort of arbitrary things. But part of the Lelantus Spark protocol is this thing called a one out of many proofs. In terms of privacy, we kind of sit somewhere in between Zcash and Monero. I mean, as it currently is. So,
Okay.
like Monero, when you use ring signatures right now, you pull when you want to make a transaction, you pull another like 15 other decoy inputs, and then you have like 15 other decoy outputs, right? Our anonymity sets is more like in the range of like 32,000, right? Which is obviously, I guess, several magnitudes larger than that. And
Wow.
but obviously, Zcash is like in the billions or so. Obviously, in practical terms, I don't know whether there is a huge difference between like 32,000, like if you already have to weave through 32,000, it's like what's another million or so. I'm sure there's probably like definitely the Zcash protocol in that sense has higher privacy, but our setup is actually really cool in the sense that it's modular. That means instead of having one ZKP that does almost everything, we each ZKP is doing a specific thing, which is kind of similar to how Monero approaches things, right? Kind of think like ring signatures as the membership proof, and then you have your bullet proofs for the range proofs. Then there's a balance proof. So there are like several different ZK proofs that are doing different types of hiding and proving, right? And I guess with Lelantus Spark, we also use bullet proofs to hide the amounts. We also we have that special one out of many proofs to prove membership that is obviously scaling a lot higher. And yeah, we have a lot of other ZKP components there. So it's kind of like a modular kind of setup, which gives certain advantages in the sense that if there is a better proof, we can kind of like switch it out and switch the new proof in without affecting the rest of the structure. Of course, there are some certain things we do, but it is quite flexible. And even recently, I think if you have been following Monero, they've been talking about food chain membership proofs, right? Which
Yeah.
allows kind of like global anonymity sets. And we can actually take that and place it into Spark, and it works. Actually, it works even better than if you put it into Monero actually. So it kind of goes to show how flexible the protocol is. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It's
Yeah, it
quite
does.
quite nuanced.
So you just mentioned Monero's effort to implement full chain membership proofs and
Right.
how it would work better in Firo. Are you guys
Correct.
planning on implementing full chain membership proofs as well, or is that not on the
Yes,
roadmap?
definitely that's what we are aiming for. I mean, we've contributed a little bit to helping Luke or Kayaba nerf when his FCMP work. Obviously, Luke is like a freaking genius, and we are in like very close contact. And he actually said that, hey, if Firo also wants FCMPs, we can also probably looking up to do certain components. So we're actually in discussions to enable that. So he also mentioned that. So I don't know how deeply you go into it, but currently Luke's proposal for Monero is something called FCMP plus plus,
Okay.
which has these additional things. But because we are already using Spark, we don't really need those plus plus. We only need the FCMP, which reduces complexity a little bit. And but we are gonna get like I would say slightly probably like this. This is of course based on rough calculations, but even by Luke's standards, he says that we'll probably be a little bit more efficient than what Monero is. But I don't think it's not like, oh yeah, it's not like 10 times faster or something like that. But yeah, I guess our setup is a lot more clean. But Luke's proposal of FCMP plus plus actually allows, like, you don't need to change addresses. You don't need to, you can use the existing anonymity set. So there's a lot of things that I would say, although the slightly less performance makes it much better for Monero specifically, but not necessarily a better protocol, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because I actually just interviewed Luke like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was asking him about full chain membership proofs. And originally, he explained to me that full chain membership proofs were going to be implemented as part of Seraphis.
Surface,
But
correct.
with his new proposal, now that's no longer necessary, and he doesn't know if Seraphis they're going to move forward with it because
Yep.
like the efficiency gains that you would get by going full Seraphis, he doesn't know if they're enough to justify like changing the addresses and all that stuff you just mentioned.
Correct.
But I guess
That's
since
right.
Firo has Lelantis Spark, which Seraphis is
Yes.
heavily based upon, you guys don't need the plus plus from the full chain membership proofs because you already have like I guess those qualities under Lelantis Spark. Am I correct in
Correct.
assuming that?
That
Okay.
is right.
Well, that's super interesting. I noticed you guys are using like Dandelion plus plus, like Monero uses to obfuscate IP addresses. You guys have a hybrid proof of work and proof of stake consensus model. Can you kind of explain
Right.
how that works and how that differs from something like Monero that is purely proof of work?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, this is I guess a really interesting thing. We went down actually a whole rabbit hole in determining this, right? And especially as a smaller chain, and I actually think, like, to me, I mean, I know there's a lot of proof of work purists, and I can understand that, mainly because, like, it's an objective source of thing, like, you can always determine what's the chain with the most accumulated work, right?
Hmm.
And but at the same time, there are actually a lot of undesirable properties, and one of it is the kind of lack of finality, right? I mean, technically, if you don't checkpoint, if you don't put the max reorg length, if someone manages to, amass enough hash rate, it can rewrite, like, several days of history, and it's working as intended, right? But obviously, that would be kind of catastrophic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you think of it from that point of view, and like, people say, like, oh, it's secure after one confirmation, two confirmations, six confirmations. It's kind of like, I mean, it's a bit subjective, right? Because obviously the security changes from time to time, and obviously the security when you're being attacked is different when the security in a normal scenario. So it's like, as a merchant, right? You're like, oh yeah, so when should I consider this thing secure, right?
Yeah.
And waiting for confirmations is never fun in a sort of like a retail or a face-to-face scenario, right? Now, so we are, partially proof of work. We use a GPU, a really cool GPU like focus algorithm called Firo Power, which is based off something called Proc Power that was originally written for Ethereum.
Okay.
And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the cool thing is the masternode stuff, which came from Dash, which I know that Dash and Monero have a lot of beef and bad blood, but it enables a lot of very, very cool properties. And even Andreas Antonopoulos, I don't know if I'm kind of butchering his name, he also thinks it's a great idea. And the main thing is that, look, you have your proof of work, right, which still does the proposing the transaction that goes into the block, still works like, Nakamoto consensus, right?
Yes.
But the moment that a block is found, you will have these master nodes, which we have certain collateral backing it. So right now there's like 4,000 master nodes. Obviously, this number fluctuates, and there's kind of like 1,000 Firo backing it. And the idea is that these master nodes will kind of automatically organize themselves in the kind of like a random or rather deterministic way into groups of 400. That means they call them quorums of 400, right?
Okay.
And based on the block hash, one of these quorums will be selected to look at this block and say, okay, all you master nodes, can you vote which was the block that you saw first, right? So
Mhm.
let's say if there's two conflicting blocks and 60% of the master nodes saw that this block came first, they will do some sort of BLS key signing, and they will actually kind of like checkpoint that block. So they say, all right, we're locking in this block. We call it chain locks. And once the master nodes chain lock those blocks cannot be overridden by a longer chain anymore. So so that's kind of like a double protection. That means now you cannot 51% attack, because the moment the master nodes checkpoint, like sign this thing that they saw this block first, that block is effectively checkpointed, right? That means you cannot reverse before that point. So I think that's quite cool, which means that blocks are final in a couple of seconds after they have been confirmed. One confirmation is final, right? And it also does this to transactions. So you know how, like in Bitcoin Cash, some people say, "Oh yeah, zero confirmations are safe." But it's like,
Yeah.
not really, right? But in this case, the master nodes are also looking at transactions and also voting to see, okay, I'm going to lock this transaction in, and I'm not going to allow any sort of conflicting transactions. So transactions are also almost final within a couple of seconds as well. So when you're doing transactions, you don't have to wait for a block confirmation. So I don't have to, like, some chains, they kind of get around it by saying, okay, let's make our block time like 10 seconds or 20 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Which results in a lot of bloat, like especially if you don't have the volume to support it. But if you have like a longer block time, like for us 2.5 minutes, right? Then you can get confirmation within a couple of seconds, notwithstanding the longer block time as well. So finality of transactions, protection against 51% attacks, because that means if you want to kind of attack our chain, you kind of have to take out the master nodes first, then attack the chain using using mining power. And it's also interesting in the sense that the people who have mining power are also not going to be the same kind of people who are holding a lot of Firo, unlike in pure proof of stake systems where the person that is attacking most likely is like, just one group of people, right? Here you
Yeah.
kind of need two separate groups of people to mount an effective attack. So I think that is cool. Obviously, Monero people would say, oh, like you have this master nodes, there's some sort of permission and stuff like that, which isn't really true. I mean, there's no like whitelist or anything. All you need to do is like show that you have 1,000 Firo, you sign that transaction, and then you host the node. And even if the master nodes get taken out, you still have Nakamoto consensus anyway, right? And
Yeah.
for a smaller chain, we have been 51% attacked before, just actually like a couple of weeks before we implemented this new hybrid system. Someone actually hired a GPU farm with like 50, 60,000 GPUs to attack us. So kind of
Wow.
goes to show, like, like even you think that your chain secure, a determined attacker that just wants to make a point can do that. And that's kind of like the weakness of, like, like with Monero, you kind of like say like, oh yeah, let's we don't want to embrace ASICs, right? We are very anti ASICs because we want to make sure that we um we want to make sure that anyone can mine, is accessible to everybody, correct?
Yeah.
And here we are also the same, that we want to make sure that it's the regular, like you can mine Firo using commodity hardware that you can go to a computer store and buy, rather than having to go to some specialized store. But the problem with that is that, unlike ASICs, that if you have an ASIC and you attack the coin that your ASIC is built for, your ASIC then becomes worthless, right? While if you are using a GPU, you attack the coin, you still have a perfectly good graphics card that can still do AI, that can still mine other coins, right? So it does allow, like, more mercenary attacks, and I think GPU miners are less loyal, right? Unlike in Monero, which is kind of like, there's a big proportion of botnet hash rate, which is also why we didn't go down the CPU road, which is what random X does, right? Because we felt that Yeah, we understand the synergy between botnets and Monero. Like, sometimes like the botnets do ransomware and they also want to support. So it kind of like makes sense there. But we also felt that, ultimately botnets also give an unfair advantage. That means like you have a few people controlling a lot of hash rate, uh, and the average Joe is like not mining profitably. So yeah, it's kind of like a set of trade-offs that we decided, and we found that GPUs plus this hybrid mechanism is the best. Though recently in recent years, I've kind of grown a bit more jaded towards GPU miners because they are not the same people that were around during the early days when miners contributed back to the projects. They were now everyone's like, oh, what's the US dollar value on mining? So it's a bit of different industry, different market right now.
With the finality that you mentioned from the proof of stake component to Firo, like how quick is the transaction? Is it like as quick as like a zero comp transaction like in Bitcoin Cash, or is it more like Monero where you do need to wait for like a confirmation or 10 confirmations or something like that? Like how much more efficient are the transactions?
So I would say, so actually, like it would be, it could actually like technically be, final within like 3 or 4 seconds, but because we use Dandelion plus plus, which kind of like bounces the transaction here and there first,
Yeah.
so it's more realistically within 20 seconds. So it's still pretty good, I would say. It's still good enough for like face-to-face transactions. And if you really have to, you can choose to disable Dandelion and then you'll see your transaction in a couple of seconds. Yeah.
With the master nodes and mining, like what are the block rewards the same? Like, do I earn the same amount of Firo from providing hash rate through mining with my GPU as I would
Um.
from running a master node and doing that?
Well, obviously, like the block reward is split, right?
Okay.
And so it's like now. Oh gosh, I don't know why because we've been talking so much about changing this tokenomics, so that I'm actually a bit embarrassed that I am now not very sure what's the current one. I mean, we haven't changed it for a while. But basically, the majority of it goes to master nodes, but there's still, I think, around like 25% of the block rewards that goes to miners. And then obviously there's the development that goes to development, and there's also a separate community fund that is managed kind of like independently from the core team. So it's all divided between these four groups of people: miners, masternodes, developers, and the community fund. So you can't really say that, oh, am I getting enough? Because it's a matter of like supply and demand. Obviously, if there are many master nodes, right,
Yeah.
then obviously that pie is shared with more people. So that may or may not be more profitable than mining. And I guess with mining as well. But obviously they're taking a smaller cut of the pie. And that has a lot of we actually wanted to give them more, but then if you take a look at our hash rate, they are very concentrated, like 85% on the single pool. And we said that, look, if you guys want to have more, if you want to show that you care for the project, you should shift your hash rate, at least like divide it a little bit. And because we allow everyone to weigh in on these discussions, but they didn't show up because they didn't care. And they just continued mining on that two miners. So the rest of the community was like, well, if you don't care for your project, you're gonna get slashed, right? So that's how the miners proportion of the reward got slashed. So yeah. And what was really interesting also was that we actually tried really hard to say like, look, maybe if it's just a money thing, why don't we have like a 6 months campaign to give rewards. We funded other mining pools to say that if miners went on their pools, they're gonna get like 10 to 15% more rewards, through our subsidy than if they mine with this particular mining pool. But they didn't switch, so which kind of like reinforced a view that like, well, these people they're just like mercenaries, and not all of them. Obviously, there are some that mine just to support the chain. but like the vast majority of the hash rate just doesn't give a shit. So it kind of really made me jaded because we spend a lot of time and research to make like a GPU only algorithm,
Mhm.
but it turns out like these people don't really care. so so yeah.
And then with Firo supply, on the website right now, it says that there's 21.4 million total supply. Is
Yes.
that like a hard cap, or is there going to be like a tail emission similar to Monero, or is it kind of like
So
stuck
so
like Bitcoin at 21 million?
So currently it is a hard cap, but I'm actually personally a big fan of tail emissions, and that is something that I was trying to convince my community to say like, hey, tail emissions is a good idea, but everyone's like, we don't have to deal with it now. And actually, I feel like in the next couple of halvings, Bitcoiners has to really ask themselves like, what are they going to do about the block reward? Because I don't think at the current rate, like fees are going to be sufficient to sustain the mining,
I
right?
don't
And I
either.
really like, yeah, I really like the I would say tail emission approach, which gives a steady reward. That means because even if you base it off transaction fees alone, or like the vast majority, it's really a bad idea because it means that your security is going to fluctuate with the number of transactions. So that means if less people use the chain, the security drops, and kind of leaves the chain like more vulnerable. And then when more people are using the chain, then the because and paying more fees, then the security goes up. And I feel like that's kind of bad. There should be at least a base level of steady security. And then okay, yeah, fees can go up and down, but it cannot be like the main thing is this huge variable. I mean, you see how Bitcoin fees can vary from really cheap to really expensive in a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Another issue that I see with it is that the scaling path that they've chosen to push everything off chain, like onto layer
Yeah.
twos or layer threes,
Mm.
is taking that fee revenue that would be gained by miners securing the chain, and they're pushing it off chain, which is not very sustainable in my opinion. So like in Bitcoin land right now, the main conversation by anyone who's even considering this as an issue is either tail emission like Monero or demurrage. And I don't know like which one's more popular, but like really I think a lot of Bitcoiners just kind of have a blind spot there. There's only like a couple people that are actually talking about a plan B if the security budget fails, Peter Todd being one of them. But among Bitcoiners, like it's really not a popular topic of discussion. Like they just think that somehow magically pushing all the transaction activity on the Lightning Network is somehow going to create like settlement transactions that will fill this gap and this need to fund miners after the block subsidy disappears. So I think they're in for a rude awakening as well.
I mean, it's kind of like, like it's kind of surprising that many people also consider ETFs as a kind of like scaling solution, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But I feel like, yeah, I mean the things that I'm quite pragmatic in the sense that I'm not like super against like custody and stuff like that. I feel like there's a time and place for those type of things, but to kind of like cheer for it, or like say like this is okay, when the solution to me is like pretty simple, like yeah, have a little modest increase on your block size, right?
Yeah.
Admit that actually, like for all that you hate the Bitcoin Cash guys, they had the point. Stop trying to say that Lightning is going to solve everything. It isn't, and we've been waiting freaking how many years for Lightning to solve everything, and even the original authors of Lightning Network say like it wasn't designed to do this. It's not meant to do that. It can be help in scaling, but it shouldn't be this thing that is going to solve everything, right? So I mean, like I did really like the Monero approach. I think like recently, because I think Monero is under some sort of like flooding attack, right? And we saw dynamic blocks, kick in, right?
Yeah.
Which I think wasn't really like I think it was working, but not. I think it could be tweaked to work better, right? But it was interesting to kind of see it in action, and see that block size like slowly increase. And I do hope that more people sort of like get away, like, because people say, oh, you're gonna have infinity supply, and I think, come on, like, this is so dumb. It's like, if you have a fixed inflation like a tail emission, it is technically infinity, but not like in the sense that people think it is. You know what I mean, right? It's
Yeah.
predictable. It's low, and you actually want the currency to be slightly inflationary to replace coins that are lost, to allow people to come in and stuff like that. I think there is value to a slight controlled, scheduled inflation, not one that not like the government can decide to print money and give it to whoever they want, right? So it's a bit different. Yeah.
I agree. I think after like 15 years of the Bitcoin hard cap like experiment,
Yeah.
there is something to be said for inflation and like velocity of money and things like that. Like I know inflation devalues currency and it's a bad thing overall if there's too much of it, but a little bit does seem to be beneficial for the use of a currency and incentivizing people to spend it and use it rather than just hoard it and hope number goes up like we see in Bitcoin right now, whereas people are kind of disincentivized to spend it because if they spend it now, in 4 years maybe they spent like $100,000 in fiat money on like a pizza or something, like the famous Laszlo story or whatever. So
Yeah.
I do think inflation is a little bit important, like especially if it's a very low number. Like with Monero's tail emission, it trends to zero asymptotically. So like it really is very very little. And it to me, it's one of the most ridiculous arguments that like, oh, Bitcoin's got a hard cap, but Monero's going to inflate away to zero, when Monero's inflation and stock to flow ratio is lower than the supply of gold, which has historically been a store of value for like 6,000 years. So uh, I think those concerns are very, very overblown, and I can see how it may be beneficial to have that ongoing security budget subsidy for long-term chain security. I don't know your thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, no. I more or less agree, but I guess, like, I think one of my gripes about, like, some of the Monero maxis. Actually, let me preface this. I don't like any type of maxis, right?
Me
Like,
neither.
I feel that maxis are just lazy, intellectually lazy people, because there's no such thing as everything that can solve everything, right? It's just
Yeah.
easy to just go down the cult route, right? And if I have, like, I guess, a criticism of Monero, which maybe, I don't know, like, one side of me. Okay, let me just say it then. So like, Monero's like emission curve is actually like pretty front loaded, right? Like, I think in the first 2 years, most of the supply is already kind of like emitted, right? Which
Yes.
very heavily favors early
Early
adopters,
adopters.
more so than Bitcoin, right? And when people say, "Oh, Monero is fairly distributed," and I mean, there was also, like, that drama with like the early issues with the, some people call it a pre-mine. I think there was like also like a issue with the, I think, one of the miners that was released, like an unoptimized miner was released or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing, but there was some shenanigans that, on top of the very aggressive supply schedule you already had during the early, uh, very high emission times, you had kind of an unfair distribution of mining rewards. So,
Hmm.
people who say that, oh yeah, Monero is fairly distributed and stuff like that, like, okay, come on, give me a break, like, at the same time, in this day and age, I don't know, it's like, it seems that when you very heavily reward early adopters and your coin takes off, these early adopters will tend to give back, right? Because, yeah, they probably got rich, they'll continue to donate to the CCS and all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
While if you take a look at something where it's fairly distributed, everyone just feels like, oh, it's it's someone else's problem, right? So while this may sound kind of bad, but maybe there is an argument to actually have a more centralized or front-loaded emission, right? Like, take a look at Pirate Chain, right? I think it was 99% emitted within 2 years as well, and it was also mined by ASICs, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing better than us, right? So I'm like at least price wise, right? So I'm not really sure on this, because if you talk about fair distribution, take a look at Grin, right? Grin is the very, I would say, embodiment of fair distribution, right? A fixed amount for the rest of time, right? It's just like a
Yeah.
fixed emission. And that's like super fair. That means like, it doesn't really reward early adopters, but it also makes people like, yeah, why should I get in? I'm not an early adopter. I'm not special, and why should I give back? Because I'm in the same boat. I'm fair with everybody, right? That kind of like, not my problem, right? so so yeah, I know we're going off topic, but it was just one of those things that have been like, something that's like, been plaguing me, like because Firo follows like Bitcoin cycle, and I'm like, does that actually make sense? Like we've had a really good like distribution of our coins already. Like, do we still need like another 100 years or so of distribution, right? Like with all these markets that are available, right? Do we actually need that, or should we just accelerate the emission? And yeah, that's just my thoughts anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's actually very interesting that you say that because I interviewed John Winter Murphy from Wownero, and
Yes.
he also really likes Grin's uh, distribution and believes
Right.
that it's way better and like more fair and egalitarian. And then with Wownero, like he kind of chose to model it like where the distribution takes place over like 80 years or something like that. But right now, like
Yep.
Wownera's distribution is a lot more fair. Like if you look at the curves of distribution, it's pretty similar, but it's a lot more like drawn out. So for like the next 80
Yep.
years, like only like 50% of the Wownero supply has been emitted so far. Whereas like with Bitcoin, it was like within like a year or two. With Monero, it was within a year or two. It sounds like with Firo, it was also within a year or two.
No, no,
So,
no. Firo is like right now, like like our circulating supply is 13.8 million.
oh,
So
okay.
we're not,
So you're about
yeah,
halfway also, a
we're
little
about
more.
halfway there. But then it's like
Yeah.
we've been around since 2016. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, no, it's just interesting to hear your take on it because I've never really like thought about it too much. Like I've always been kind of like, oh, proof of work, fair launch. Like if it's proof of work, it's a fair launch. But the emission schedule does have something to do with it, and like it does impact like the ecosystem of the chain if there's a large community of early adopters that have a majority of the supply.
And I think like these people that uh donating to Monero are probably a lot of these early adopters, right? So
Yeah,
I think that there is a case to be made for like having a rewarding early adopters because they will be kind of like your champions, especially if it does well, right? Well, if you talk about two fair distribution, sounds great on paper. It's all like aligns with my morals and ethics and stuff. But if it leads to your coin being like, not doing well, then what's the point, right? So yeah, I don't know. I might get lynched for this opinion, but yeah, I mean, Firo follows the Bitcoin one, which is I would say reasonably fair and pretty drawn out, right? So it's just
yeah.
like in retrospect, I probably would have chose a more aggressive emission model. Yeah.
Okay. And then another topic that I've been exploring on this podcast is private DeFi, private tokenization, private smart contracts. I just
Right.
did an
Cool.
interview with Lunar Mining from DarkFi. I interviewed
Hmm.
Mr. Quibs from Zano, and
Yeah.
Firo is also working on solutions to these problems. Can you kind of give us a rundown of how Firo is approaching like private smart contracts and tokens and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's more like similar to the Zano road. Obviously, that means we are more focused on the tokenization aspect, right? Rather than having like full smart contract capability, and we prefer to have like AMMs and all that on a higher layer, like on something like Serai that Luke is building, rather than inbuilt into the protocol, right? Because
Hmm.
I do think that DeFi is really exciting, but for like I would say like the main cool thing about smart contracts, like the really is decentralized exchanges. liquidity pools, and lending protocols, right? And of those, I feel that liquidity pools and decentralized exchanges are the most important, and smart contracts enable that in a very nice way, right? But
Hmm.
if because like, okay, what other stuff would you really need? Like, what's really interesting that's happening in DeFi? Okay, as having like some rebasing Ponzi token, or some Luna type of thing, right? I mean, like, do we really need all of that? If we just like enable the best parts, or like the core parts of DeFi, without having to have all this huge attack surface area, I do think there is some value there, right? The way we take, I would say, that the core features of what DeFi is, without having to have all that complexity, right? So we have upcoming asset layer called Elysium. We actually did like soft launch Elysium, but it was on the previous Lelantis protocol, not the Lelantis Spark protocol. But then
Okay.
because when we were already transitioning to the Spark protocol, we were like, wait a minute, maybe you should just like put this on hold and just do it properly with the Spark protocol, right? And we came up with a way to support arbitrary assets. That means like you can have your stable coins, you can have your meme coins and whatnot. And obviously they are all indistinguishable in terms of assets. That means whether you're transferring Firo, whether you're transferring a stable coin or something, you can't really see it on chain, which I think is really important for a smaller chain like ours, where they may be, I mean, there are people using it, but obviously if more people build on it, it's kind of like anonymity loves company, and if more people build on it, we become not just a privacy coin, we become like a privacy ecosystem.
Yes.
I would say there are certain differences the way that we do it versus Zano. In the sense that this is obviously from my cryptographer, who says that, well, first of all, I do think we scale better with the number of assets being created, and the other thing that we can do is we also have, like, private type of private NFTs, which I think for the moment Zano's system does not. But I mean, I'm not saying that, oh, poo-pooing their achievements. I mean, they have it live, we don't, right? So, I'm not shitting on them. I do think they're a really cool project. But just like kind of like illustrating the main differences between us and them. And obviously, Xano is still using like a ring signature model, while ours would be using Spark, maybe with FCMP, right? So, the anonymity sets there would be a lot greater. But who knows? I think Xano would probably figure out a way to shoehorn FCMPs into their assets protocol as well. But yeah, I haven't heard
Yeah, I think if Monero
concrete plans.
implements full chain membership proofs, that Zano will probably follow along and do that as well, because there's a lot of overlap between the two code bases and also the development communities.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a given, but whether it would also extend to their asset protocol, like, what changes they would need to make. I'm pretty confident that they will find a way, but as of today, I have not known whether they have fully figured out how to enable FCMPs with their confidential assets. That's all. I'm
Okay.
not saying that they won't be able to do it. I just don't think they have it fully fleshed out yet. Yeah.
And for Firo's implementation, like how soon are you guys planning to launch it on mainnet? I know you mentioned that it's not live yet. Like, what's the timeline that you guys are looking at?
We were hoping to launch it sometime this year. I mean, we already have all the cryptographic libraries and work done for it. But then, a lot of stuff, I think, like, I don't know if you saw the recent stuff with the exchange addresses and all of that. I think this is pretty important to talk about, like the
Let's
Binance
talk
thing.
about
Like,
that. Are you talking about the Binance thing where they wanted transparent
yes,
addresses? Okay, let's talk
correct.
about
That's
that.
right. Right. Let's talk about that. Okay. So first of all, um, people are gonna hate me for this, but I guess I am the one that came up with this whole idea, which then was adopted by Zcash and Pivex and a couple of other privacy coins. So if you want to blame, the blame is on me. Okay, all right. But but let me kind of like lay out the scenario, right?
Okay.
and 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 basically in September, Binance kind of reached out to all these privacy coins and said like, "Hey, are you going to be removing privacy?" And then we're like, "What?" You know, uh, we can't really do that because that's our main goal, right? And obviously Monero was like, huh, yeah, okay, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But then they're like, oh, okay, noted. And then we're like, wait, like what's happening here, right? Like why would they ask that? And then when we say that, they say, okay, noted. And then I say, look, are you under some sort of regulatory pressure? I'm actually a former lawyer. I was a lawyer for 10 years. I mean, let me understand what are the regulatory challenges that you are facing. And let's see if we can come up with something that, makes both sides happy, right? So basically, I think it was actually because Binance, you have to realize, is probably the exchange that has the most like regulatory scrutiny in it. Like there's actual like US regulators sitting inside Binance, making sure that everything is fine, right?
Yeah.
And Europe's after them, everyone's after them because they are the largest crypto exchange in the world. So obviously they're under a lot of pressure, to do something with this privacy coin problem, right? And 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 I at first thought like, oh my gosh, they're gonna delete all privacy coins. And Zcash was going like, oh yeah, just use our view keys and stuff like that. And because of the way MiCA, which is the market and crypto assets legislation, was kind of drafted, and also because the amount of tooling and work that the exchange need to do to support these view keys, I was like, this is gonna be a pretty long shot. And if Zcash is just going to be saying no, we just want view keys only, that's the only way to solve it, I felt like Binance is just gonna, oh yeah, we're gonna delist everybody, right? So when I saw this happening, I was like, okay, let me take a look, let's see what we can do. So I came up with this. So the MiCA regulations say two things, which says that exchanges, or like, I'm not giving you the exact wording, but giving you the idea, right? Exchanges cannot allow the trading of assets that have inbuilt anonymization features, right? Which I guess
Hmm.
means like Zcash, Monero, Firo, and all of this, unless the exchange can identify the users and the transaction history of its users. So when a non-lawyer looks at this, they're like, oh, that means they're gonna delist all privacy coins unless they can identify everybody. That means there's a backdoor.
Yeah.
But as a lawyer, when you look at it and you're like, no, actually, that's not what it means, because first of all, the exchange knows who is dealing with, right? If they're doing KYC, they know who the user is. So it already satisfies the first limb. I mean, at least this is one way you can interpret it, right? It satisfies the first limb. But the second one, which is saying that, the exchange has to see the transaction history of that user. And that's a lot trickier because, well, if it comes from an unshielded source, like let's say from a Zcash shielding or from a Spark unshielding, there's no transaction history because the funds just appear in in the exchange, right?
Yeah.
And there's no transaction history to speak of, right? But if it goes through an intermediate, like a transparent address, which can be a totally new one, there is technically a transaction history to refer to, right?
Yeah.
And we propose this idea to say, okay, yes, that means the good thing is that the exchange then, just says like, look, I'm not touching any directly unshielded funds, right? It always has to go to transparent. Everyone can see how much funds is going into the exchange, right? So and we think that that satisfies the requirements, right? Obviously they also get like, blockchain analysis providers to say, yeah, we can, because there is a transparent layer, we can do some analysis. Obviously how useful that analysis is depends on the actual user, right? Like if the user is a dumbass, then no matter how good your privacy tag, he's gonna expose himself. But if you do it well, if you know what you're doing, I do think that the general privacy loss isn't that bad, considering that the exchange already knows who you are and probably knows that you're depositing X amount anyway. They have to know that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So so I was kind of like thinking like, look, obviously Monero has a lot more other exchanges, and the ring signature model, the mandatory privacy, the ethos would prevent it from doing any of this, right? But Firo is not in that same category. But I respect Monero for what they did. I think it's important that they did what they did. But I also think that they shouldn't be hating on coins like us that did this exchange address thing, which says that we're creating a exchange, like a special address for exchanges that does not accept any directly unshielded, like you cannot directly unshield into it. It has to come from a transparent fund, right?
Yeah.
And why I say that is that because at the end of the day, if you want privacy coins to survive, at the end of the day, the biggest thing that will protect us is adoption, right? And if you get and let's face it, centralized exchanges, I think at least for the next few years or so, is going to be the primary way for most users to be interacting with crypto, right? Like like Binance has like 200 million users, right? Are you sure that you have that many users in the whole of DeFi, right? Maybe you have a million users or so, right?
Yeah.
And we have a cross-chain atomic DEX, atomic swap DEX solution, and it's totally working. It works quite well, but hardly anyone's using it, right? So realistically, obviously I'm always for decentralized exchanges, but if you want to have like mainstream adoption, if you want people to be like like your average Joe, you have to realize that the journey usually starts with a centralized exchange, right? And to
Hmm.
say that, oh, privacy coins should just embrace it and be delisted from all the centralized exchanges, puts us really in kind of like this niche pariah like state category, right? And the average Joe who's already scared of privacy and saying, why would I need a privacy coin? Says like, oh wow, there's no privacy coins on centralized exchange. They must be all for illegal activity, right? So I do think there is a very important case to make to say that by having privacy coins being able to still be retained on centralized exchanges without unacceptable compromises, I would think that for the moment it's, I would say, a good compromise, at least for us, right? And that's the way I see it, rather than saying like, oh yeah, I'll stick to my principles and never give in, even if it means that I'm going to be losing a bunch of liquidity, I'm going to be losing a bunch of users, and and yeah, obviously people would say that, oh yeah, Monero is better off without Binance and stuff like that. Maybe, maybe not, but I do think it would be a disservice if privacy coins were only available on DEXs. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Yeah.
I understand your position on this, and I also know that like Zano, Particl, Veil, you mentioned Zcash, Pivx, like a bunch of other privacy coins are also doing this in order to
No,
maintain their listings.
I don't think is Zano doing it. I know Zcash adopted a similar thing to us. Basically, after we proposed that, Binance said like, use this solution, use this exchange address solution. So Zcash then adopted like their own version of exchange addresses.
I'm pretty sure I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I know for a fact Particle and Veil do this where they have like a transparent address and then you have to send it to like a
Particl
confidential
does,
transactions
Bell
address.
does,
I think
but not
Zano
Zano, if I'm not
does as well, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Like it's been a while since I took my Zano off of Trade Ogre, so I may be mistaken. But I know there's
mistaken.
other chains that do this. Like there's several other chains that are considered privacy coins that have a transparent address for exchanges, and then
But
you once you get it to
let
your
me
wallet, you can change it to like a confidential transaction
I
address
think
with ring signatures and stuff.
I think you're confusing a normal transparent address from an exchange address, because the exchange address, a
Maybe
transparent
that
address,
that may be true also. So
a
explain the
transparent
difference, I guess, since I'm confusing it.
yeah. So a transparent address can still accept direct unshieldings. That means, like, for example, if I have some funds in Spark, I can still unshield directly into the exchange, right? There's nothing stopping me from doing that, right?
Okay.
While an exchange address would not allow me to do that. They would just it would just on a consensus basis. No, you cannot unshield into exchange addresses. You need to send it to a normal transparent address first before going into the exchange.
Okay. So like the normal unshielded address is like I guess similar to like a normal Bitcoin address where there's like no privacy, it's fully transparent.
Correct. That's right. But the exchange address further does not accept direct unshieldings. Yeah. That's just more for regulatory purposes. I don't claim that it's a technical marvel, but it
Uh-huh.
was a very easy thing to implement that allowed us to implement it and keep the listings, right? Which I think, like, if you take a look, even even Kraken, who has been like strongly defending Monero, was still forced to delist like Monero from a couple of countries like Ireland and UK, and slowly, if Micah comes into force, I'll not be surprised that more European countries delisting Monero, which is pretty unfortunate. I like to see Monero fight for it, and they are large enough to try to mount that type of fight. But yeah, I guess it's good that different coins are taking different stances. So we're kind of like, spreading our eggs, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Now, by using these exchange addresses and knowing that the exchange is using Chainalysis to analyze these addresses, is there any privacy like attack vector from doing that?
Okay, so this one I have to be a bit careful because I've been warned to say that I should not be telling people how to use my privacy tools very well, or else I may be construed as facilitating money laundering, which honestly I think is kind of bull, right? I mean, like, I'm just telling people how to use privacy tools well, right?
Yeah.
But like, if I'm generating a new transparent address, right, then then what is the history that's associated with it, right? It's just that one unshielding transaction into it.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you reuse, like, a transparent address that you always use, right, then yes, there's going to be privacy loss. But if you know what you're doing, if you generate new transparent addresses all the time, which is what our QT wallet, our reference wallet, would do automatically when sending to a transparent address, there, I would say there's minimal privacy loss in that regard. Yeah. I mean, like, you think about it, right? You generate a new address. The only history of that address is that unshielding and sending to the exchange. You're not giving that much data additional, right? Versus like directly unshielding to an exchange. Yeah. And I actually would argue to say that there are benefits. Like, I don't know if you knew, like, Monero people are like saying, oh, Binance is operating a fractional reserve. They have like all these things. At least when exchanges who are custodying funds on top of their customers, in a certain way, if you are custodying funds for your customers, it's kind of good that they are transparent addresses. You can see the movements of how these how the exchange is dealing with your coin within it, right? Like, oh, is it moving to
Yeah.
a cold wallet? Is it moving to a hot wallet? Or is it being drained to something else, right? In a way, in that case, transparency is good. And I would say that because of Monero's ring signature, current ring signature model, which very really heavily relies on mandatory privacy to work well. Because if you have ring signatures and non-mandatory privacy, like, the privacy, yeah, it's kind of poo, right? But with like more like modern ZKP kind of techniques, if you know what you're doing, even with a transparent layer, there is how to say pretty good privacy as well. I would say that, I guess, the main benefit of mandatory privacy is that it forces adoption by everybody, right? That means that everyone's on the same. You don't have to play around with different addresses. It's just a better UX. And I definitely agree on that. But if it comes to like, oh yeah, we cannot be on any single, like, big centralized exchange, then yeah, we kind of think like, well, what are we actually giving up here, right? Do we want to be sidelined? Do we want to be known as the illicit activity thing, which is what all these regulators like to paint us when there's actual. If you think about it, most of the money laundering and crime is happening through USDT, right? So why are they targeting us? Which is kind
You mentioned why you chose to make the exchange addresses and stay on centralized exchanges, but Firo is also on basic swap decks. You mentioned that Firo has its own decks. What's the effort being made to be on these like peer-to-peer trading platforms?
So Firo Dex is actually kind of like a white label of Komodo's Komodo wallet that was previously called Atomic Dex, and it does a pretty good job of, like, swapping between all of this. Basic swap, of course, we are integrated as well. Though I think basic swap, like I really like what they're doing, but I think that they're still relatively early in development. So unless you're like very comfortable in dealing with like minor hiccups, then basic swap probably is not like ready for prime time today. Uh, but we are also looking into Serai Dex, which is run by Luke, which allows like kind of AMM models, which I think is pretty good in terms of a community liquidity standpoint because no one wants to like run bots and stuff like that, which can be quite difficult. But another very interesting project that has integrated us is Decred. Decred, they have something called they used to call it DCR Dex or Decred Dex. Now they've renamed it to Bison Wallet,
Okay.
and it's also atomic swap based thing, but they have this really cool kind of like automated no, they have like a market maker bot that has a nice GUI that simplifies people to provide liquidity to the DEX. Because right now, right, like if you want to provide liquidity on atomic DEX or basic swap DEX, you kind of have to like build your own scripts to kind of like manage the liquidity, find the reference price and make sure like you're not being arbitraged to death, right?
Yeah.
So but like Decred, at least the Bison wallet, I saw some like teasers of it, and they have this kind of like nice GUI to allow the regular users to provide liquidity to the DEX and yeah, do so in an easy fashion. I think that's a really interesting approach. But obviously, like right now, you see what are the most popular DEXs? They're all in, automated market maker, smart contract based stuff, which is why I think the stuff like Serai, I guess like Torchain and Maya Swap. I mean, Torchain looks like they don't want to integrate privacy coins. Maya
Yeah.
also is like very selective of who they add. So we've been in talks with Luke, who at least is open to the idea of integrating Firo as well if the community or the people who run the Serai nodes are willing to do that. So yeah, those are the efforts, and we're also making like we're doing a lot of recently we've been doing a lot of optimizations to our light wallet infrastructure to kind of like because when you're doing this atomic swap based thing or you're running nodes to do all these swaps, most people don't want to run like, oh yeah, I need to maintain nodes, full nodes of like 6 or 7 different chains, right? So I think having light wallet infrastructure is important there. Yeah.
Okay, what about Havino? Havino is like a Monero focused Bisq fork, which just launched, and it's been pretty popular so far. Like, it's not super popular, but there's a few community members from Monero that are using it. Havino supports like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I think Litecoin
Yep.
and maybe one other coin. But Firo seems like it could be a good fit. Have you guys talked to anybody from Havino to see if Firo uh, could be
Well,
integrated?
we this guy called Eric Sicione. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
I know who you're talking
ERC.
about. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce his name either, but I know
Yeah,
exactly who you're
yeah.
talking about.
So I think he was like involved with Haveno and something, and he has been
He
a
left the
contributor
project,
to.
as far as
Yeah,
I
he
know.
left the project,
Yeah.
and he has been contributing to the Firo project,
Oh, okay.
on kind of like a part time basis. And I mean, I have to admit, I didn't like firsthand ask Haveno people, but I'm like, hey, should we be looking into Haveno? And then he said like, I said, don't bother. I mean, because he said like he knew the people there, and he said it was unlikely for Firo to be integrated. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna waste my time there if he thinks that it's unlikely to be integrated, and we already have like a couple of atomic swap based dexes, and I was like thinking like we're kind of small project and we want to divide our liquidity over like 3 or 4 different atomic swap based dexes. Maybe a issue unless there was a real unless like Haveno controls like such a huge like
Amount of trading.
proportion of users. Yeah, then
Yeah.
we're like okay, because we also used to be on Bisq, and we
Okay, I was
did
going to ask you about Bisq next.
yeah. We did well integrated for biz. We maintained it for like a year or so, and we didn't see much take up on that. And we're just like, okay, you know. And the last time I used biz, I haven't used it in a couple of years. I remember it not being a amazing user
Yeah,
experience,
it's a little
but
clunky.
I yeah, it's kind of clunky and but I see it's still important. Like if you want to do small transactions of fiat that are I guess that your risk profile isn't that high, right? But
Yeah.
I don't. It's still kind of clunky. It's still kind of manual. It's not like your. It's kind of more for the hardcore people rather than the average Joe. That's
Yeah,
just my point,
Havino's a
right?
Bisq
Could be
fork,
totally
so
wrong.
the user experience is pretty similar. And then also
Ah,
during development, I don't know if you remember, but when they were working on like an early version of Havino, there was like a big uproar about them considering adding Zcash. Like the Monero community and the
ah,
Zcash community don't really get along. So like when Havino announced that they were
yes.
going to add Zcash, there was like a huge amount of contention in the community, and then they I guess dropped Zcash and decided not to include it.
I think the feud between Zcash and Monero is so unnecessary. I
Me
mean,
too.
like, it's just like, yeah, they're kind of different people. They have different goals, but I mean, at the same time, it's kind of the same goal as well, right? Like both for privacy. It's just that one approaches it more differently. One is more hamstrung by regulation, but calling each other a scam and like, your privacy sucks and then oh no, your VC set off and stuff like that. I mean, like I get it, but like at the end of the day, anything that affects you guys is gonna affect each other anyway. So it's better to
Exactly.
work together. But yeah, it can be a challenge. I mean, like we've tried working with other privacy projects before and not all of them went well. But like our interactions with Monero. I mean, I would say obviously like Monero, there's no like official team, right? There are some core contributors. We've met some really cool people like Luke, Aaron Faker, like Sarang, who also contributes a lot to our research and stuff. And we've been invited to MoneroCon several times to present our work, and
Were you
it's
guys
cool to
at the
see
one that
these.
just happened like a couple weeks?
No,
Okay.
unfortunately, we did not. Though Aaron did actually present our work on privacy preserving e-voting, which was apparently received quite well. So I guess
Nice.
we were there-ish, but not like
Officially.
not like not officially. But our work was presented at MoneroCon as well. Yeah. Mm.
Cool. Well, I don't know what your opinion is on this, Ruben, but I believe that like with the crypto ecosystem in general, like privacy coins are the only legitimate cryptos, and the rest of crypto being transparent chains that allow for surveillance and censorship and like taxation and stuff, to me are not very interesting. I think that it's a problem in crypto in general that each coin's community is very tribalistic, which leads to these like disputes and rivalries and stuff like that. But in the privacy sphere, I think that it's very, very counterproductive. I think that privacy coin projects should be very open to working together because we're all kind of going towards the same goals, which is personal freedom and protecting users from being exploited by governments and tyrannical tax authorities and stuff like that. So like to me, I think the tribalism in privacy communities is kind of stupid. I would like to see privacy communities be more open towards cooperating and working together and sharing their knowledge so that we can have like more of a united front for personal freedom and financial freedom, especially considering like the impending rollout of CBDCs and the effort to impose total financial surveillance and
Right.
financial censorship on every person. I kind of think that privacy coins are like the embodiment of like the cypherpunk philosophy that early crypto users were very, very dedicated to, which we've kind of see get watered down as like more of the general public has come in and looked for number go up. Like, what's your opinion on the need for privacy right now and the tribalism between privacy communities?
I'm actually really not sure. I mean, the thing is that obviously my heart doesn't want. I mean, like I would love to have like a collaborative community, one that supports each other, and we may not agree on everything. We may have but at the same time, like we have good relationships with Zano. We have good relationships with like select people in Monero. Not everybody, all right. We're friends at Pivax, and I would say that I try to kind of like build friendships with, I would say, similarly minded projects, which obviously mean privacy projects, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you take a look at which projects manage to, because at the end of the day, Monero is actually pretty tribalistic and it can be pretty toxic, and in a way that's also kind of its strength. Like having a very like Bitcoin maxis, right? Like it's a freaking cult on its own, right? and
Yeah.
and and while it's very polarizing, it's kind of worked, like in the sense that we are the best, everything else is a shit coin, right? And Monero is kind of like that too, but with privacy coins, right? Like we are the best, we are the only OG cypherpunk, the rest are shit coins, right? uh and because of that, it creates a lot of pride and tribalism, and people are like feeling that they're part of a powerful movement, right? And that kind of tribalism, because I think humans are kind of geared towards cults. Like, there's a reason why there's like the Nazis, there's all this like weird, like, people are
And
like going
religions and
crazy. Yeah, like, even like over Trump, right? I mean, like
yeah.
he's far from a perfect person, or but they're all like it's a literal cult, right? And I'm not saying that it's bad. Maybe it is bad, but it works, right? But if you have this kind of like, oh, we're all friends, kumbaya and whatnot, right? It's hard to sell people on your vision, right? They're like, oh well, if everyone's kumbaya, then what makes you special, right? Like that sort of thing. So I don't really know. I don't really know what this is, something that I'm trying to come to grips with myself, right? Like,
It's an
should I
interesting
build
take
like,
you have.
yeah, because like if you take a look at Daryl, right? Like Daryl is like this. The tech is like okay, obviously it's been broken, but the dishonesty is so bullshit. But they've managed to build like a very resilient cultish community that's obviously divorced from reality, right? They don't really know what their project actually does, but they support it so much that they are able to buy any shit and they will support the project no matter what it does. And
Even with the
you
recent
yeah,
de-anonymization that Luke
even with the reason the
presented.
anonymization, they still defend it. They're like, "Oh, you guys are haters," and watching them do all this mental gymnastics is like, wow, it's like literally like people drank the Kool-Aid and died and still believe in it. And you you may make it, you may think that, I think this is a bad thing, and then I'm like at the window, it's like, wait, I actually kind of wish I had a community that would really really stand up for
That
me,
was that
right?
committed.
And yeah, that's that committed, right? And in a way, like sometimes when people like in my channel, they're like, oh, Firo price going down, and there's be like one or two like really like strong, like, oh, like they believe in Monero, they believe in Firo no matter how how hard we've been hitting down and whatnot. And sometimes maybe it's irrational, right? But it's nice to have this type of people, right? Like to me, like these are your linchpins of your community, right? So creating a cult kind of like reinforces that, like Bitcoin is a cult at this point, right? And I
Yeah,
would
I would agree.
say that an example of, I would say, a kind of non-cult movement that has kind of worked, which I would like to emulate, is like Ethereum, right? Because I would say, yeah, Vitalik is a pretty, I would say, influential figure, right? But
Mhm.
he's he I don't think he's not the person that he's not a Craig Wright or someone that like buffs in the limelight, right? And he's willing to be proved wrong. And I I I think that with Ethereum, there's at least like intellectual honesty in their cult, at least in their leadership or the people that are very vocal about it. At least more intellectual honesty than let's say in Bitcoin or something else, right? So yeah, I mean, but if you take a look, like most of crypto is a cult, right? And the tribalism, the symbolism and all of that, like take a look at what's trending now. It's all this like political meme coins, and
Yeah.
meme coins are also another kind of cult, except that they are fun and cute, right? And so it hides the cultishness behind behind cuteness, right? So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't really know about which is the right way to go. But I think both have their pros and cons, right?
Could see that. That's an interesting take because, like, I was someone who used to be a Bitcoin maximalist for a long time, and a few years back, I started kind of realizing that there was holes in the narrative, like gaping holes in the narrative around
Yep.
privacy and like fees and security and stuff. So I started kind of opening my mind to other arguments and listening to criticisms about Bitcoin, and I kind of changed my mind with new data and left my Bitcoin maximalist thing and kind of became a multi-coiner that's like more focused on privacy coins. So since I was a maximalist for a long time, like I've kind of come to despise maximalism and see it as like closed-minded, right? So like, and
Yes.
I know there's other people like me that were like hardcore Bitcoiners that have come out of it and been like, oh, I don't know about these maxis, right? So to hear you kind of talk about the benefits of maximalism and like this enthusiasm around a project is a very, very interesting take for someone like me who's kind of spent the last few years, like, I guess, coming to an opposite conclusion.
To be clear, I'm not advocating maximalism. I
No,
I
no, I know you're not,
personally
but I
think
mean, you're
that
talking about like some aspects of it that maybe I hadn't considered.
it's important in certain things. I think the best kind of the combination is like to have a cultish following, but one that still retains intellectual honesty. That's a bit hard, but I mean, I guess that's like the best balance, right?
Yeah,
Because as long as you have intellectual honesty, it means that you're willing to change and adapt and to make things for the better, right? But if you don't have that, then you're just gonna be like ossified and just like be in your little bubble, and that's where the cult kind of fails. So yeah.
yeah. So, what do you think about the need for privacy right now? Like, we've been seeing arrests of Tornado Cash developers,
Yes.
the Bitcoin Fog guy, Samurai. We've been seeing a bunch of Lightning businesses like close down, like Lightning wallets and stuff in the U.S. Crypto companies pulling out of the U.S. and looking for more favorable jurisdictions. It seems like with Mika, as you mentioned, that they want to outlaw privacy in all forms. They want to
Yep.
possibly even outlaw self custody and things like that, which are kind of quintessential to crypto as a technology. What is your opinion on the need for privacy moving forward?
Again, I have a kind of like weird nuanced take on this. I mean, I definitely am a very big advocate of privacy, right? And I really think that it is very hard to have something that functions as money to have no privacy. And it kind of goes to show that if people don't care about it, it's obviously because it's just a casino at the moment. Everyone's just like number go up and whatnot. People
Yeah.
aren't really using it that much for real life purposes, right? But the thing is that, like, I don't know how many people actually care about like financial privacy until it is probably too late, right? And it requires something really terrible to happen or a big expose until people actually wake up to that. And like for example, like take a look, like we've been giving up our privacy for years, 10, 20 years, since the advent of internet and social media, right? We were just happily like, oh yeah, let's use Facebook for
Click the
free,
EULA,
let's use
click the EULA.
Gmail for free, click this, click that, and we loved it. We were like, wow, all these amazing services, and I don't have to pay for anything, right? Without realizing, how much data we were giving. And even now, like Like, yeah, even though I'm a big privacy advocate, I still use Chat GPT. I still use, like, AI tools, knowing that they are getting data from me, right? So so it is hard to ask the average Joe to say, yeah, oh yeah, I'm going to go down, I'm going to, like, support privacy coins, knowing that they're going to be facing regulatory pressure, knowing that that all this negative narrative is going to go up to them. Like, how how would the average Joe actually see that, right? It's hard. And then they'll say, like, well, okay, what Bitcoin, what about Ethereum, right? Like, you have these smart contract mixers, or like I would say other types of things that offer maybe good enough privacy, or maybe does Lightning offer good enough privacy, right? Like, I'm just a regular Joe. I don't need to have that, like, really really high level of privacy, worried that people will track me down because I'm doing nothing wrong. That is obviously what most people think. And
Mhm.
even sometimes I catch myself doing that, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm using Telegram, I can chat with people and say stupid things, and maybe inappropriate jokes, right? When maybe I should be thinking twice, because if I'm targeted, then those chats may be used against me, right? But we always kind of underestimate that we think that we are nobody. So while I definitely appreciate the importance of privacy, I'm also kind of very wary to keep on talking about, like, the doomsday scenario, whereby, oh yeah, we're gonna have this CBDC and everything is gonna be surveilled. It is something that I am very personally worried about, having been on having been the victim of these type of things, and also because having seen friends being cut off from the financial system just because of a small mistake they made. So let me kind of, like, elaborate a
Explain
little
that.
bit about
Can
my
you tell us a
friend.
little bit about that?
So I believe that, as humans, we sometimes do things that are wrong, right? But then we have, like, my friend's wife. So she was a CFO of this quite large company, and unfortunately, her bosses ran away with, I don't know, I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars, or maybe billions of dollars, right?
Wow.
And she, as the CFO, had authorized a transfer of, I think it was something like 30, 40,000 Sing dollars, which, okay, it's a decent sum of money, but it's not in the millions or something like that, right? And what happened was, the boss actually told us, "Hey, make this transfer. I'm in a rush. Make that transfer." And she actually wrote in the email to say that, I don't know why boss is like, pushing for this transfer. What's so urgent about this? This is kind of weird. And she put this in writing, right? And unfortunately, I may be getting the facts slightly wrong, but unfortunately, those funds were actually, like, misdirected, and like, ended up with some sanctioned individual and stuff like that, right?
Wow.
And because they couldn't find the boss, they went after her, and they sent her. She's a mother of children, and doesn't, I mean, like, yeah, she was sent to jail for 1 year, right? And even while the trial was progressing, even before she was found guilty, all the banks cut her off, terminated all her bank accounts, terminated all her cards, and there will be forever this financial black mark on her. And the judge actually said that, oh, yeah, you may say that she's innocent, but she knew from that email that she said that she found something weird about this transaction. She should have resigned. She should have, like, not allowed this. We have to punish her, to tell people that, you cannot say that, oh, it's going to be okay. You have to stand up, be prepared to resign, and to call shit out. And I'm like, how many people are
Wow.
willing to do that, right? And she spent a year in jail, now cannot find, very hard to find employment, and she's totally cut off from the financial system, right? And yeah, sure, she did something wrong, but did she deserve that amount of punishment, right? And that, like, that kind of scenario really scares me, because I've seen, like, the cases with the privacy people, right? Like the Tornado Cash and whatnot. They uploaded this smart contract that unfortunately North Korea used, and then suddenly they're spending 5 years in jail, which is crazy, right? Like you realize that all these little things, like even things that I say in this chat, even things that I say in Telegram, if a regulator or if an authoritarian government really wants to get me, they're probably gonna find shit, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of like wow, I really would like to at least have the option to preserve my privacy, right? The option to protect certain things from the world, not because I'm doing anything illegal, but because I don't want this to be used as ammunition against me, right? And back in 2007, actually, how I got into crypto was because I ran a VPN service. And back in 2007, VPNs were considered like, oh, why would you have a VPN? You must be doing something illegal that you want to hide your IP address, right? Now, obviously, everywhere is like, not VPN, malware VPN, your
Yeah.
antivirus comes with a VPN, your browser comes with a VPN. It's so normalized now. But when I was running a VPN business then, my local financial institutions terminated all my ability to accept any sort of credit card payments. They refused to do business with me. PayPal froze my funds. And I asked them, well, what's the problem? They're like, oh, we're just not comfortable with the business that you're doing. Even though like there's no chargeback, it's not illegal. We're just not comfortable. It's a high risk industry, right?
Yeah.
And that was like total bullshit. Like, I was like, I I delivered the service, I earned the money, the customers are happy, but this financial intermediary who is already, charging me an arm and a leg,
Probably
just
even
decides
more for being
to
high risk, right?
correct and just totally decides to wreck me, right? And I was like, wow, this really sucks. And that's how I kind of got into cryptocurrency, and how I also got into privacy cryptocurrency specifically because of these experiences that made me feel like, hey, my money is not my own, right? And if this was happening like in 2007, 2008, now with CBDCs, this is going to be so much easier. And, Americans always talking about their right to bear arms, to rise against the authoritarian government. I mean, like, you're not going to be able to do shit if they can freeze all your money, like, and it really, really empowers authoritarian governments that become very, very hard to dislodge. Like in Malaysia, like where I come from, like the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission and all these things, they are often used as political weapons against the people who are against the government, right? Like you're the opposition or you're saying something wrong, or send this thing of you. But with a CBDC, this becomes infinitely easier, right?
Yeah.
And in China, we're already seeing this type of things. Of course, most people say like, oh, I'm I'm not doing anything fishy. I'm definitely not going to be affected by this. It's only going to catch these weird, dodgy people, and I think that's really scary because, like another example, there's this MMA fighter in China. His name is Su Xiaodong, and he's kind of an asshole. He goes around. He's an MMA fighter, but he goes around challenging all these traditional kung fu masters and say like, look, I'll take you on whatever terms and whatnot, and let's fight. You want to have gloves, you don't want to have gloves, anything. We're going, but I'm gonna kick your ass, right? And so he goes around beating up all these Chinese kung fu masters and calling them bullshit, right? But some Chinese traditional masters obviously don't want to fight him, and obviously he's trying to get a rise out of them. So he's like, saying, "Oh yeah, your Tai Chi is bullshit, your martial arts bullshit and whatnot," right? Like try to get them to want to fight him, right?
Yeah.
And instead, this master goes to the Chinese authorities and say he's disrespecting our Chinese culture and heritage and whatnot. And what happened was the government actually minus his social credit score, and so that he couldn't travel like to a certain places and all of this. Like there are serious consequences when your credit score goes down, right? So as a result, he's like, fuck it. So this guy had to make an apology and whatnot. So that his that his social credit score could be restored. And I was like, wow, like sure he's an asshole, but to have the state intervene there and the kind of like ruin someone's life just like that kind of like made me say like, wow, CBDCs sound like a really, really horrible thing. And unfortunately, like even Malaysia, although we're not going to have CBDCs, next year we have something called e-invoicing, which sounds very innocuous,
Yeah.
but it means that every single transaction made in Malaysia, whether you're buying a cup of coffee, a bowl of noodles, is going to be reported directly to the tax authorities. And that's like fucking scary, right? Like, because I
Yeah.
have been on the wrong side of tax authorities. I have actually paid my taxes and declare my taxes correctly. But, I was being harassed and hounded by these tax authorities for an offense that doesn't even exist. Luckily I'm a lawyer. I dare to defend, but other people who don't are just being terrorized. And it's like, okay, I give in. I pay something and go away, right? So I've seen this. I've faced this firsthand. So people say that maybe Ruben, you're kind of special, and maybe I am, but because of the personal experiences, I definitely feel that privacy is really important, but I don't know if the average Joe feels that yet. And
I feel like
yeah,
they're going
sorry.
to eventually because, like, one thing I've noticed is nobody cares about privacy until they do. Like, they think
Yes,
it doesn't
correct.
matter until something bad happens, and then they realize how important it is. So I think, like, with these more and more like controlling policies that are going to be implemented, and then like less and less ability to use your own money. Like, like they're talking about doing stuff like in New York, for instance, in the United States, like they outlawed sodas like over a certain size because like it's unhealthy. Like people are too
Yeah,
fat, too much sugar, right? But like wait until they can program that into your money. And you try to go to a store and like go buy a Coke,
yeah,
and then next thing you know, like transaction declined, you can't buy another soda for 30 days. I think when stuff like that starts happening to people and they realize like how much basic freedom and free will that they've given up, then privacy will become more important, and maybe they'll seek out some of these better solutions that are more free.
yeah.
But if it comes down to that, like if they're able to implement that level of societal control, it may be too late. Like, you
Yes,
know,
exactly. Which is kind of how I say, like sometimes I feel like I'm building tech for a future that I don't want to see. You know what I mean?
yeah, I do know what you mean. But I mean, it's important work because there needs to be a vanguard, like for privacy and like these fundamental human rights that there's currently an all-out assault on. Like, I don't believe that any of these governments have our best interests in mind. I don't care how they present themselves as like, caring about you and trying to provide services for you or whatever. Like, to me, they all seem like they're very, very predatory. And whenever they roll out like one of these things, like for your protection or for your safety to like help you, it usually ends up working against you in every single way. And it's horrible. So, like, I have no faith that they're going to be able to roll this out in a way that's not going to be harmful.
Yeah.
I just don't
I
trust them.
I don't know if you saw like even like and one of the like kind of like we always talk about, oh, privacy is enabling money laundering and terrorist funding and all of this, when the actual evidence is like kind of like, yes, obviously it's happening to like small degrees, but it's happening on your banking system, like HSBC laundered like drug cartel money knowingly and actively created like little boxes so that the money bags can fit, and like hardly anyone went to jail, right? Because and here you are like trying to crack down on privacy coins. And I always feel that, like, especially with regulation that tends to try to take away the right for privacy, they always try to get the moral high ground. Like very recently, I think just yesterday, right? The European Union is trying to propose to say that, oh, end-to-end encryption, you should not have it. We should, when
Oh, I saw that.
if the if you're sharing any sort of link or sending any sort of image, you know, we have to be able to see it because it could be child abuse material and stuff like that. And I'm like, that is just so bullshit, like really bullshit, because it's like they always like to use this child abuse type of thing. And first of all, like, yes, of course it happens, but like it's kind of like saying like, oh yeah, my grandma may fall in the bathroom. Let's install CCTVs in every single bathroom, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that if you're gonna do this, the actual people who are, if I'm actually like involved in this bullshit, right? I'm just used to a different messenger, right? Like, what are you talking about, right? There's always technology that will allow me to share this material. I just moved to a different platform, and I moved to a different platform so actual criminals don't get caught, and but all the rest of us have our privacy kind of compromised, right?
I would
And
take it a little further and even say that like the people that are proposing these invasive policies are the predators themselves. Like we saw with the whole Jeffrey Epstein scandal that like all the leadership of the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, like all these politicians, all these people proposing these laws were implicated in being child abusers, flying on Epstein's plane to his island and who knows doing what with young children and underage girls and stuff like that. So, like the very people that are trying to implement these total surveillance invasive policies are also the people that are doing this child abuse kind of stuff. So, like to me, it just seems very, very hypocritical. And there's no way that we should ever give them that kind of power over us or our data.
yeah, it's so ironic that the government's like, oh, we have to protect the government's privacy, but the regular citizens' privacy say, no, you guys shouldn't have it. I'm like, it's
Yeah,
so
it's crazy.
ridiculous, right? Yeah, like when Snowden, exposed everything and like traitor and whatnot. I'm like, okay, whatever your views on Snowden, he woke us up to the extent of like what really is the deep state and how much information they're actually capturing on their own citizens, or it's
Yeah.
ridiculous, it's crazy, right? And I think that movement, although like some may say like, oh yeah, endangered soldiers and stuff like that is a traitor and whatnot, it actually kind of made a push towards end-to-end encryption in our day-to-day lives, and it's constantly being under attack. So I feel like we are making some progress, at least on the side of like end-to-end encrypted communication. But when it comes to financial privacy or like privacy crypto, I don't think we are doing enough to actually protect our rights. There's not enough people talking about it, unfortunately. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I agree with you on that. Ruben, it's been
Yes.
almost,
2 hours.
yeah, almost 2 hours. So I don't want to take up your whole day. I do want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been excellent talking to you. This was a super amazing conversation. I appreciate you coming on here and telling us all about Firo. Is there anything that you want to say before you hop off the show?
No, I mean, like, I just want to say that, like, you guys may call me, I'm a sellout and and all of that, but I hope this kind of, shows that I'm not. I really deeply care about this. I may have a different approach to things, but I'm on the same side, right? And I would love, to meet like similar-minded individuals like yourself and have, I would say, constructive conversations like this, and where we can see different points of view. And I think that's really important. I really hate maximalism. I hate the simplification of complex topics to like binaries, right? Like, oh, it's good or bad, black or white. And I really feel that even with privacy, we have to be mindful, like, you know, that we don't go down the route of maximalism. So, join us in our socials, our Telegram, our Discord, or whatnot. Would love to see you guys there. And
Do you want to give
yeah,
those links out so that people can join?
sure. It's so if you just go to Firo, Firo.org, And if you just click on our socials, we have our Telegram channels and Discord channel links all there. So that's the easiest way. And we're pretty welcoming, and we try not to be maximalist. I think we're probably the least maxis community that you can find. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. Well, it's been awesome talking to you, man. I'd love to have you back on the show whenever you want to come back on. I don't know,
Cool.
like maybe in a few months when you guys roll out
Yeah.
some of the new features. And yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, man.